Good evening, I'm Leland Vittert. It's no secret that China has been waging cultural warfare on the American nation. And here's why you should care. Bending the knee to China is not a successful strategy, whether it's Hollywood, the U.S. government, or even major companies. It simply won't work. And that's a lesson King James has learned this week as the Space Jam 2 mystery deepens. Here's what we know. The movie Space Jam 2 has been released in the United States. The NBA star has been silent on China's humanitarian offenses for years. Financial success for both he and Warner Brothers depends on this China release. And without it, Space Jam 2 is likely to lose tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars. Joining us now to discuss the Space Jam mystery and China's ongoing culture war is Steve Krakauer and Rick Berman. Steve looks at how media is covering the China issue. Berman is an expert on how China is trying to use its economic might to influence every part of the American culture and economy. Gentlemen, good to see you both. We appreciate it. Steve, are you surprised the lack of coverage into what's going on with Space Jam?
I wish I could say I was, to be honest with you. Look at the way the media is structured now. It's essentially corporate media are full of conglomerates. You talk about Warner Brothers releasing Space Jam. That CNN is part of Warner Media. ABC News, are they going to cover it? They're owned by Disney, and it might happen to the next Disney release. So in a way, they've sort of hamstrung themselves by aligning, by all of these corporations are just giant conglomerations. And what's the cost-benefit analysis of going after and trying to dig into what's really going on with China? It's not going to be good for their bottom line. It's going to continue to hurt them financially.
Rick, you've cataloged so much of this. If China is going to block LeBron, who's towed the communist line better than just about any celebrity, and his movie is still blocked inside China, what's the lesson for Hollywood?
The lesson for Hollywood is that you need to self-censor yourself. I don't know why Space Jam hasn't really found its way into their movie theaters. You know, they only accept 34 movies that are produced outside of China. But having said that, LeBron is a pretty famous guy out in China, and you would think that his movie would be well received. But in any event, there's a lot of self-censorship going on in this country when it comes to movies. There's a lot of censorship on the part of companies. As Steve just said, you know, ABC is going to watch what it says about China. If ABC's got a substantial interest in Disney parks, you know, they got a huge park in Shanghai. There's a lot of leverage that these companies are experiencing. You know, Kodak tried to get into the pharmaceutical business recently, but they still sell some film. And so some French photographer came up with a great shot. Kodak put it on its page. Then it turned out that he said something about the Uyghurs being in an Orwellian dystopia, and the Chinese went nuts.
Bringing up the Uyghurs is, shall we say, a sensitive topic for the Chinese. Mike Waltz, the congressman who's been outspoken on this, the CCP is deterred by strength and emboldened by weakness. LeBron and Space Jam 2 are learning the hard way that there are consequences to doing business with Xi and the CCP. I guess you could also have said, Steve, CC Nike.
Yeah, look, but it shows the fruitlessness of it. LeBron James essentially attacked the NBA and the general manager, Daryl Morey, during the whole Hong Kong situation a couple years ago. He's been only subservient to China, and still there's nothing that he benefits and nothing that he gains from doing that when Space Jam is not going to make any China money there. So it shows that when you don't cover Uyghur concentration camps, for example, in the media, you're not going to necessarily get the benefit financially from doing that. There's no point to doing that. You might as well cover the reality.
Steve, as you think about this in terms of the media conglomerates looking at this, no one, you know, there was very little done and very little coverage of what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish populations in Germany and also in Eastern Europe in the late 30s and especially into the early 40s. Is there any comparison to the lack of coverage about the Uyghurs? Is it that people aren't interested?
I don't know if it's necessarily comparable, but I would also say, though, that the fact is that you've got corporate media on one end of the spectrum, and they are making boatloads, billions. I mean, they are hundreds of millions in many cases. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have media outlets now that have rising platforms, the sort of the anti-establishment media. That's whether it's podcasts, whether it's digital video, whether it's new upstart television networks that are fighting back and are finding a real audience because the audience is there. And that these places are not beholden to China interests and can actually tell the real story. So I think we're seeing a shift now, and I'm glad to see it.
It's an important one. Rick, we just have a couple of seconds here, but so far, I know China Watch, they cover how much the Chinese have had effects on American movies. I know they're buying up movie theaters, talking about making investments in major American infrastructure. We also just saw this. This is from Politico. China is buying up American farms. Washington wants to crack down. Bipartisan pressure is building to stop foreign nationals from purchasing American farm operations and receiving taxpayer subsidies. But perhaps this is a little bit like closing the barn door after the horse has left, because there's a whole lot of American food companies that China owns, right?
Well, they did own Smithfield, which was a huge company, but they disinvested themselves of that. But yes, they are trying to have a program in effect by 2025 where they dominate 10 industries: aerospace, artificial intelligence, transportation, and agriculture is one of them. And they're learning a lot about agriculture, how to produce foods. They've got a huge population. Remember, China's got 4 times the number of people that we have in the United States. And so they're looking for every advantage that they can and to disadvantage other industries in other countries that compete with them. And, they've stolen information from U.S. universities on agriculture technology.
And they certainly
they are into everything.
Well, yeah, and certainly they enjoy the economic power they have over the United States, especially when it relates to soy farmers. Steve, Rick, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
We've touched on China's economic and cultural war on America, but they are also waging a war perhaps on American spies and diplomats abroad. We're going to walk over to the touchscreen now so you can see just where these attacks have been happening. The Wall Street Journal reports that the CIA considers these attacks such a threat. They just put the same team that found Osama bin Laden on the case. Incidents of what are called Havana Syndrome started back in 2016 down in Havana when U.S. and Canadian diplomats were overwhelmed by unexplained medical symptoms. Since then, there have been reports in Washington, D.C., right outside the White House, as a matter of fact, and a slew of other places around the world. Americans in Vienna, Georgia, that's the country, not the state, Tbilisi, China and Russia have all reported similar unexplained symptoms. The attacks are believed to be from a weapon that directs radio waves or microwaves at individuals, giving them concussion-like symptoms. Our next guest has actually experienced Havana Syndrome firsthand, had to retire from the CIA because of them. With that, we bring in Mark Polymerpolopoulos, former CIA case officer. Mark, first of all, we're glad you're feeling well enough to join us, but here's the question. A-team's on it. You think they're going to find the person?
Yeah, so look, it's great to be here tonight. And I was really encouraged, when I learned that that CIA Director Bill Burns put, many of the same people who really found Osama bin Laden, put them on this case of investigating Havana Syndrome, because it's something that has certainly perplexed the U.S. government and the intelligence community for 6 years now. So I think we will find out, who is behind this. And in my view, it's likely going to be, an adversary of ours. And then there's going to be some really tough questions on what to do.
Well, no kidding, it would be an adversary, conceivably. You have to think the only 2 countries that really would have the ability to do this would be China and Russia. We know the Russians experimented with it back in the 1970s. You're a spy or case officer. Make a brief argument why it would be either one of those.
Well, look, so first and foremost, one could think that the weapon might actually have evolved. The first theories of this was that this might have been some kind of signals intelligence system, in essence, a system designed to collect our communications, maybe our cell phones, or to see, in essence, what we were doing. And then maybe it turned into a weapon. So you're right. So look, we know, the Russians have experimented this, the Soviets and then the Russians. For many years, there was an NSA document that was subject to a FOIA request several years ago that indicated the Russians did have this. Wow.
Fascinating. So the reasons that they would attack Americans in China is perhaps made to throw us off the case?
But look, the other thing is that other countries, other adversaries could have this weapon. Now, the interesting thing about this is look what this has done. It's sowed confusion around the world. Frankly, my colleagues are nervous, they're scared, and so what it does is it takes you off the ball field.
Yeah,
This is an invisible weapon.
It did with you. We have the Wall Street Journal headline here that we want to put up in terms of this Havana Syndrome task force to be led by veteran hunt for bin Laden, CIA director to undercover agency veteran to track down cause of health incidents suffered by U.S. spies and diplomats. Briefly tell us, it takes you off the battlefield, but it can also sort of immediately incapacitate you, correct? That was your experience?
Right, absolutely. So, in Moscow on December 17, I was injured and I had to retire 2 years later. I mean, I still have a headache. It hasn't gone away for 3 years. So it's really an insidious weapon because it doesn't show any markers. It's not a gunshot. And so ultimately it's going to incapacitate you and really cause medical expenses and a whole bunch of disarray in the U.S. national security establishment. So in one way, it's a pretty ingenious weapon. And again, it's something that we have to find out because this is something that's affecting our national security personnel. This can't stand.
Yeah, we're putting up some of the syndromes: piercing sounds, intense head pressure, hearing loss, dizziness, severe nausea. You said you have a headache that hasn't gone away. You had to retire. You said that it happened on a specific date, and I know there may be some things you can and can't share from your time in Moscow, but do you believe that they knew exactly who you were and what you were doing, and that's why they targeted you?
Absolutely. So I was a senior CIA official. I was the equivalent of a 4-star general, in the U.S. military. I was there on a trip to Moscow to see the embassy, meet the ambassador, and in fact to meet Russian officials. And we're staying at a hotel 2 blocks from the U.S. embassy. I had constant surveillance. Both walking around the city, but also even in the hotel. We know the hotels are technically wired for sound and video, so no doubt that they were tracking every one of my moves.
Last question for you. You mentioned that if we figure out who did this in this team that found bin Laden figures this out, and they have access to the very best information America has from human sources, from signals intelligence, perhaps this NSA intercept that you're talking about as well. Not perhaps, they do have access to it. You said it's going to bring up some uncomfortable questions. What do you mean by that?
Right, sure. So look, any administration is going to have a set policy. So what the Biden administration now is doing with Russia or with China, everything will be thrown upside down if we find out that in effect they were conducting acts of war against our personnel. So whether it's armed control talks with the Russians or trade talks with the Chinese, at some point when we find out who did this, it's going to cause some uncomfortable questions because in fact we're going to have to fight back. And I believe the new CIA director Bill Burns is committed to this. But I'll tell you, whatever administration is faced, inevitably with that intelligence showing who is complicit, it's going to be some tough choices at those National Security Council meetings.
You said an act of war, and certainly the symptoms you've experienced speak to exactly that. Mark Polymeropoulos, we appreciate not only your service, but you joining us as well today to talk about it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Have a great night. Appreciate it.
You too. Coming up, adult entertainment star Brandy Love, an outspoken conservative, tells us why she was banned from a conservative event. She joins us live next. Plus, America appears to be dividing into two groups, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. So, do we need to accept that COVID will be a part of our lives forever? Then, the search for solutions to Chicago's gun violence problem continues with Attorney General Merrick Garland. And what is a success look like for President Biden? He spoke to an empty auditorium at a live town hall event. We'll get a report card. Conservative free speech group Turning Point USA continues to defend themselves for throwing out an adult entertainment star from one of their conventions. We first told you about Brandy Love's story on Monday night. Tonight, she joins us live. We appreciate it. Nice to see you. She's a vocal conservative and contributing writer to The Federalist. Nice to see you. Turning Point USA, one of the largest conservative organizations, especially for youth in America, they had a big conference. They say it's inappropriate to have a woman who's in your profession at a conference, even as an attendee, where there's minors there. They have a point?
I think we all need to ask that exact question. When I first was kicked out of TPUSA, you can imagine I was kicked back on my heels and I thought, my God, did I do something wrong? I went back to their very website to maybe figure this out. And one word after another, page after page after page on TPUSA. College campuses, universities, professors. These words are used over and over. And being a mother of college-age students, I've been a huge fan and advocate for what they're doing, for their voice on the very liberal universities that we have. So when I was asked by a friend to attend this, and I looked at the lineup of unbelievable speakers, people I've watched and listened to for years, I jumped at the opportunity to get back out into public and, of all things, be around what I believe to be other fellow patriots and conservatives.
So we have a picture of you when you showed up there that you posted on social media as you arrived. Any idea how you got recognized, how they figured out that you were there?
Therein lies the $1 million question. For people that didn't want me there because of who I am, having 2 months from when I purchased my adult VIP ticket, it's extremely intriguing to me how I was picked out, and not only picked out, but tossed out for my profession. Well, it's a great question.
Yeah, and we have video of you walking around there. So Turning Point USA sent you an email after you'd gone back, I think, to your hotel. It's a multi-day conference, saying this decision is final. This revocation does not impact applications to future events, and we hope that you will consider applying again in the future. Please do not attempt to attend the summit, as any attempt to disrupt may affect consideration for future participation. Thank you. This is the statement they gave us. It was about the length of a feature magazine piece, their statement, so we've cut it down. TPUSA makes no apology for this, a position which should not be controversial, especially when minors are involved. TPUSA was not trying to be unkind or rude to Miss Love, nor are we questioning her motives for attending. We privately communicated the decision to her, and it was her choice to make that communication public. I've often found in this business that when you tell people what you're not doing, that's exactly what you're doing. Why were you there? One article said that you had a political consultant with you. Are you thinking of running for office?
No? Absolutely not. I was literally a private citizen, excited to go listen to speakers who I've admired and listened to and wanted to hear more from them. I was very aware of the fact that this was, in general, based on TPUSA's own language prior to that email, was college students, universities, university campuses, and professors. So none of those words chosen on their website.
So I'm guessing what I'm hearing you say, though, is that you don't think this is a sincerely held belief by Turning Point USA. You think it's virtue signaling on their part, right?
I think most of us would say that it's virtue signaling. Okay. And I do not believe in a blanket statement whatsoever that all TPUSA were on board with this agreement, but clearly enough to have it done. I would never make it a full statement, but I don't know whose decision it was.
You started selling T-shirts shortly thereafter on your website. I triggered Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is the founder of Turning Point USA. You wouldn't say any part of this was a publicity stunt. You weren't trying to get kicked out to sell the T-shirts or something like that.
If that were the case, I failed miserably because I've lost money. I'll be honest with you, that T-shirt, and I'll be happy to provide you the proof, that I have the date of when those were ordered, and it was the day 24 hours after when this all happened. So
fair enough. Had to ask the question.
Psychological therapy.
You're a known Trump supporter and have been vocal about that on social media and other places. Have you heard from him, from the president?
No.
No? All right. No. So
I'm pretty sure he's got more important things to worry about.
Well, we hear he's working a lot on his golf game these days. If President Trump we know if he was to run in 2024 again, you'd support him. You have any other favorites in the conservative movement?
DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis. Okay. Anybody else?
I don't want to get rid of him. I'm a Florida resident, so I'd like him to stay put, but I would absolutely support him if he ran.
All right, Florida residents support Ron DeSantis, but you're not running for office yourself. Brandy, we appreciate you joining us and taking the time. We're glad to have gotten you on.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good to see you. Coming up, safety now versus a family in the future. It's a question daily for women who want to have babies. Is the COVID vaccine safe for them? A doctor trying to convince women on that next. Plus, the Biden administration promises more federal resources in Chicago after 3 mass shootings last night. So is that really the answer to the gun violence problem? Global sports, less than 24 hours out from the opening of the Tokyo Olympics, is reporting its highest number of COVID cases in 6 months in Tokyo. Take a listen.
We have to remember, particularly in relation to spreading outside the village, the degree of contact between the international community inside the village and the local Japanese population outside is extremely small.
Still, Tokyo has recorded 1,979 official cases on Thursday, up from 1,300 or so on Wednesday, as the Japanese government accelerates vaccinations with an eye toward avoiding overcrowding their hospitals there. Meanwhile, in Britain, coronavirus cases have been steadily rising, and the NHS COVID tracing app has a record number of Brits self-isolating now. That means another round of pandemic pandemonium, supermarkets and wholesalers facing shortages as people stock up on necessities. Supermarkets have urged Brits not to panic, purchase items like toilet paper, pasta, bottled water, and the other thing they're running short on, wine. British ministers are facing calls to bring in the army to try and shore up the food supply. We've checked around. So far, no toilet paper or wine shortage as of yet reported here in the United States. As COVID concerns continue to dictate conversations around the world, here in the States, we seem to have divided into two Americas, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And with infection rates surging, the country is forced to face the stark economic differences for those living in rural versus urban, more populated areas. Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana and Wyoming post the lowest vaccination rates in the entire United States. To talk about this today, we have Dr. Ashish Jha, a practicing physician who's recognized globally as an expert on pandemic preparedness and response. We also have Dr. Gloria Davis, a fertility specialist at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, who spent the pandemic reaching out to rural groups with concerns about COVID and who don't have access to a wealth of information about the vaccine. Dr. Richard Davis, we're going to talk to you in a moment. First, I want to start with Dr. Jha, who's led groundbreaking research on Ebola and is now on the front lines of the COVID response. Doctor, appreciate you being with us. As we look at this, fair to say that we now have two Americas?
Yeah, first of all, Leland, thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
It is fair to say we have two Americas, not just in terms of people, vaccinated and unvaccinated, but communities, right? As your map showed, there are communities, there are entire states with very, very low vaccination rates, and they're the ones that are seeing massive spikes in cases right now. And there are other places with high vaccination rates. They're seeing small bumps, but the bottom line is they're in much, much better shape.
Yeah, well, and
we've got to make all of America look like that America. We've got to get a lot more people vaccinated.
Well, they're seeing small bumps among the unvaccinated people in these large metropolitan areas. We're now hearing that a number of school districts, including some of the biggest in America, are talking about having mask mandates for students and faculty come the fall. So if vaccines are settled science, they work. We can tell that. We can tell that from the data. Why would someone who was vaccinated need to wear a mask?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. So look, first and foremost, in terms of schools, thank God we're getting kids back into school full time.
Yeah, for sure.
We should just celebrate that, mask or no mask. All right. Now, the second issue is, why should vaccinated people wear masks? Well, one major reason is we can't tell who's vaccinated and who's not. Schools are not requiring vaccinations. They're afraid to check vaccination status. And therefore, if they know they're going to have a lot of unvaccinated people in their midst, it's just much easier to make a broad mandate for everybody. Much easier if you could just say, hey, if you're either vaccinated, if you're not, you got to wear a mask.
Right.
That would be reasonable, but schools don't want to figure that out.
Well, that's a different question, though. That's really not a medical question as much as it is a public policy question. So what I'm hearing from you is it sounds like this is going to be around for an awfully long time, because all the studies show that people who are unvaccinated as of today aren't likely to get vaccinated anytime soon. Nobody's not getting vaccinated because they don't have access to the vaccine. So do we have to accept that COVID is just going to be part of life, like the flu or the common cold, but one that you can choose to protect yourself from?
Yeah, so first of all, I do think COVID's going to be around for a long time. It's going to be endemic, right? It's just going to be one of the viruses we deal with.
At some point during this interview, Doctor, we're going to get some good news out of you.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you this, right? Look, there is good news. I mean, the biggest good news is these vaccines are awesome.
Right.
Like, get yourself vaccinated, and then you can really stop worrying about this. So that, like, I don't know. I don't have any better news than that. But the bottom line is,
it's got to be kind of difficult, though, in the sense, because you keep saying, it's great news the vaccine works, but gee, I may have to still wear a mask. My kids are going to have to wear a mask. We're already talking about restaurants shutdowns again. At what point do we not manage this to zero, as some in your profession want to do? And we say, if you don't want to be vaccinated, that's kind of your choice. The rest of us who are just going to go about our life.
Yeah, here's the problem. I look, I'm totally with you. We're not getting to zero. I'm not worried about getting to zero. The issue is this. There's so many people who are unvaccinated. We're getting these massive surges in cases. Those people are ending up in the hospital and filling up the hospitals. When the hospitals get totally full and can't take care of anybody, that's a problem for all of us.
But are we really?
There is a problem that we got to deal with.
Yeah, but we're not anywhere close to that in any major American city by any stretch of the imagination.
We are in certain places. We're not going to get there in Boston or New York, but we are
Springfield,
there.
Missouri. I heard a couple others. This is Dr. Fauci talking about this. I want to get your thoughts on his comment. Take a listen.
Even if you're vaccinated, it's suggested that you wear a mask when you are indoors in a situation where you have a level of dynamics of virus in the community that's high. So I'm not sure exactly where you are or what the dynamics are in the region that you are, but you might want to consider, if you want to go the extra mile of safety, even though you're vaccinated, when you're indoors, particularly in crowded places, you might want to consider wearing a mask.
That seems a little different than what you said, because you said wear a mask because we want to have mask mandates because we can't tell who's vaccinated. He's saying even if you're vaccinated, you need to wear a mask for protection. Again, if you're vaccinated and vaccines work, why would you need a mask?
Yeah, great question. So look, first of all, nothing in life is 100%, right?
Fair.
So the way I look at it is I live in Massachusetts. Infection rates are really low, high number of people vaccinated. I walk into a grocery store, I'm not wearing a mask, okay? If I was in Southwest Missouri, I would wear a mask. Now you say, well, why do you care? You're vaccinated. Because people who are vaccinated can still have breakthrough infections. And breakthrough infections aren't going to kill you. They're not going to land you in the hospital, but they're miserable. I don't want one. And if I can wear a mask and avoid it, I will.
I guess that goes back to
that. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that goes back to the question. You've had a great conversation about this in terms of, maybe that's a personal choice at some level and one that you laid out. Dr. Jha, I was told before I'd interviewed you, we've never gotten a chance to talk, that this was going to be a great conversation, and you exceeded very high expectations. We appreciate your time, sir. Come back often.
I would be delighted. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Bring in now Dr. Gloria Richard-Davis, who practices in Little Rock and is with the University of Arkansas Medical Services. You're a fertility specialist who's been reaching out to these more inaccessible rural areas. We put that map up. Those in Arkansas, with some of the lowest vaccination rates, to answer questions they have before committing to getting vaccinated. I want to look at something you said recently in an interview. This is the reason we're having you on today. And you talked in your interview about sort of needing to accept people where they were at and not call somebody who doesn't want to get a vaccine a tin hat conspiracy theorist. A lot of celebrities are coming out saying the vaccine, the average person is not listening to them. So we're trying to understand who the everyday influences are for our community, and the community health workers are part of that because they live and breathe. We saw that and really wanted to have you on, so we appreciate you being here. You listen to this media narrative that all the unvaccinated people are Trump voters who just won't get the vaccine. Is that what you're seeing, or is there more to it?
Oh, absolutely not. There is a lot more to it.
Okay.
It's multifaceted. None of our communities are monolithic. And so one of the things that we have done is we have conducted community advisory boards, which means that we're talking specifically to individuals in the communities who have chosen not to get the vaccine and trying to understand what their rationale is.
What are they telling you?
They're voicing concerns about distrust and misinformation, which is what we're all hearing. There's also that disinformation. I think there are some campaigns out there that's
for sure. We know the Russians, the Chinese, a lot of people are behind that. This is one that fascinated us. Brian Enton last night was down in Miami at a COVID ICU where 46%, none of the people in the ICU were vaccinated. All the patients were unvaccinated, but 46% of the healthcare workers in that hospital were unvaccinated. He heard from a number of nurses there who were young women of childbearing age, women who want to have babies, who work around people with COVID. And basically what he was hearing is that they would rather risk death from COVID than be safe from COVID and risk a child medically injured by an untested COVID vaccine. There's nothing political about that. That seems to be women who trust science, who are nurses, worried about the lack of science.
You know, first of all, we have to recognize that healthcare providers, again, there's a broad variation, right? So not everybody who is in healthcare necessarily understands all the detail, nor they understand what the publications are actually saying. Now, we have healthcare organizations that are specifically focused on reproductive capacity, both in terms of women who are currently pregnant and what the outcomes are with COVID versus those who have been vaccinated. And what we know is that vaccinated pregnant women have no increased risk of preterm labor or any other adverse outcomes during their pregnancy compared to women who do not have.
You know, but I think you'd agree, though, that if you think about women who've gotten the vaccine even a year ago in the original clinical trials, if they had gotten the vaccine, immediately gotten pregnant, they'd just be having their babies right now. We really have no idea what the outcome for those babies is going to be for at least a couple of years, right? So we're talking about a pretty small sample size.
Yes, but we also have to think about organogenesis, right? So fetal development. Fetal development occurs within the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. So we know if there's going to be any sort of congenital anomaly in those babies.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm sure one that you're making to a lot of these nurses and other healthcare workers who are talking about it. Doc, we really appreciate you being here, and we really admire what you had to say in that article.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, ma'am. Changing gears a little bit, Chicago now is becoming the focus of national attention this evening. 3 mass shootings happened in just a matter of hours, including one on a party bus. All of this unfolded as the U.S. Attorney General came to town to announce a big Justice Department crackdown on gun violence. NewsNation correspondent Rudabeh Shabazi joining us now, who was there as the Attorney General met not only with the police here in Chicago, but the mayor as well. Hi, Rudabeh.
Hi. Well, the Attorney General is here. He is announcing the launch of strike teams across the country, Leland. That's L.A., Chicago, San Francisco Bay Area, Washington, D.C., New York. And the idea is to target the trafficking of these guns. We know that there is no federal law against gun trafficking, so they're looking at different ways across jurisdictions to prosecute with other statutes when it comes to trafficking guns. For example, there are loopholes where people go to areas that are lax with gun control and then bring those guns into areas with stricter gun laws. We know that Chicago is ground zero. You mentioned the mass shootings last night, 3 of them in a matter of 6 hours. One of those was a party bus that involved about 36 people, 40 people getting off the bus. They stopped at a gas station to use the restroom, to get something to eat and drink. An SUV then pulled up and opened fire on the crowd. 8 people were wounded. One of those is in critical condition. And one of the victims was just an innocent bystander who was there just pumping gas. So we know that this is a major issue across the country, especially when you compare it to other first world nations, developed nations. 2021 is on track to become the deadliest year in 2 decades when it comes to gun violence.
We are experiencing drive-by shootings, as we mentioned in our last press conference, much more than we've seen in the last several decades. I think it's not an exaggeration to say we are in a battle for the heart and soul of some of these communities as it relates to violence.
The gun violence tragedy is now facing the country and facing it over many years. Needless to say, affects our communities and their security and safety, but it also affects the community of law enforcement officers. And everyone around this table knows what happened in Chicago with 2 ATF officers being shot and a task force officer being shot. And so this strikes not only at the communities we serve, but at our own community of law enforcement.
And Leland, the Attorney General today also calling for the confirmation of David Chipman as the head of the ATF. It hasn't had a leader since 2015. He believes having a leadership structure will make a big impact on gun violence across the country.
In terms of how the ATF can crack down on illegal sales. Rudabeh, thank you very much. Coming up, President Biden addresses a half-empty auditorium. So, what's the report card on his town hall? All right, in Cincinnati last night, President Biden held his second town hall since taking office to, well, you'll see the video, less than a full house. So, was it a success? Kind of depends on who you ask. Joining us now, two people who are well-versed in the inner workings of the White House. Alyssa Farah worked with former President Trump. Johanna Maska worked under former President Obama, planning events just like this. Ladies, appreciate you being here. Alyssa, I'm going to give you the ratings because your old boss was obsessed with them. 1.5 million viewers, which Fox beat on CNN. An event like this, where the president's trying to reach, by virtue of the network he picked, his audience, does it matter what the ratings are?
Well, it certainly matters. Listen, it's a funny shot that there's a half-empty room and you couldn't pack the live audience. But the reality is he was speaking in kind of an echo chamber. He doesn't need to be selling getting vaccinated and supporting his infrastructure package to an audience at CNN, a pretty bleak one at that, that's already with him. So if I'm rating the actual teleconference itself, I would say, it was a 5 out of 10 stars. He's got to branch out. He's got to go in unfamiliar, uncomfortable territory. Take his message to Fox. Take it to NewsNation. Those are the folks who need to hear from him.
He's welcome here anytime, Johanna, in case you have any friends in the current administration you'd like to pass it on to. But believe it or not, 1.5 million, that didn't even beat MSNBC, which is also conceivably the president's viewers. Is Biden sort of the opposite, good or bad, of President Trump, that he just so very rarely makes news?
Well, there's a good side to that.
Leland.
Oh, go ahead.
I was asking Johanna, but go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Leland, first, congrats on your new show. Very excited to be here with you and with my friend Alyssa. We definitely worked for very different presidents. But here's what I would say about speaking to an echo chamber. Come on, Alyssa. I mean, Trump spoke to Fox News. It was October 8th, 113 times. In that same time, he talked to CNN 0 times. Now, I think there's a lot of room for engagement of more media, but I would say, the whole idea is to speak directly to the American people, and he did that because he did a town hall,
to be fair, though, Johanna, to be fair to President Trump, he was the most available president ever. I covered both President Obama and President Trump. President Trump on the rope line would sit there and talk to you for an hour almost every other day. That never happened in the Obama administration.
Not to CNN, right?
No, he talked to CNN all the time. He would argue with Jim Acosta.
He tried to throw them out of the press
let's move
pool.
on. Hold on. Let's move on. This is what's interesting, though, is we're going to show you a clip from the Biden town hall, which now Republicans are fundraising off of. Take a look.
I mean, everybody thought I was a little nuts. Is in fact, it's going to be. What can a kid say? You got the vaccination? Yeah. Or whether those aliens are here or not. We know that this virus is in fact it's going to be. Or excuse me. What could they do? Portman is a.
So is the juice of the echo chamber worth the squeeze of having that video out there?
Well, listen.
Come on here.
No, Johanna, go ahead.
Oh,
that was for you.
I mean, if we're talking about, President Biden, he was not sending a thrill up Chris Matthews' leg. But when we're talking about President Trump, he told Americans to drink bleach to prevent the coronavirus. I think these kinds of fundraising emails, though, are problematic because they divide Americans further. And that's one thing I think, both of us want to see more Americans come together and try to find consensus.
Fair. Chris Matthews, 2008. That was a moment. All right, Alyssa, this is the last question to you, and we're going to move a little bit. Axios today noted that President Biden's administration has given over 1,000 TV interviews to local television stations. That was something that President Trump's administration did as well. Is there something about a safe space of local TV that makes it easier for the administration? Well, at this point, the technical gremlins have come to get us. We had Alyssa for a little while. We've lost her now. Johanna, feel free to take that.
Yeah, no, I think the only way you can actually change people's hearts and minds is by going to local press. Yeah. And it's an important strategy with misinformation out there. And so I applaud what NewsNation is trying to do in bringing local anchors into a national news platform, because I think it's crucial that we have trusted, local, factual news for communities so that we can all make progress in America. And I think that's what all of us
Johanna,
want.
Flattery will always get you back. And we'll be right back. See you soon. Welcome back. Yesterday, we promised to show you the latest military advancements from the United States. We want to remind you, though, why we're talking about it and what we're up against. First, there's the Checkmate stealth fighter that flies under the radar, carries 7 tons of firepower. That was released yesterday by the Russians, pictures of it. There's the new hypersonic cruise missiles that travel at 9 times the speed of sound and can be armed with nuclear weapons. They released those in the video of that a couple of days ago. And finally, the S-500 surface-to-air defense system, able to knock out missiles, planes, and helicopters, according to the Russians, more than 300 miles away, designed to deny American planes airspace. As for the United States, well, this is what we were talking about, the brand new stealth bomber that's coming online. These are the latest renderings of the B-21 Raider. The next generation of B-2 stealth bomber is now being designed by the Air Force. Few details are known about what the bomber can do, but when the original B-2 Spirit was tested back in the 1990s, many thought it was a UFO. They called in sightings about it, so maybe all those UFOs we've been obsessing about and showing you video of are really just the U.S. military aircraft of the future. That'll do us for tonight. Tune in tomorrow. Some of our favorite tweets of the week. You can find me at Leland Vittert. Prime's next.